Welcome to the first of our four for our summer learning series. We are diving into the state of the instructional materials market today, and we are delighted to have so many of you joining us. My name is Pasha Spencer, and I serve in the role of Senior Specialist of Partnerships here at EdReports, and I will be your facilitator for today's conversation and throughout the Coffee Chat series. We're excited to share so many learnings with you and uncover lots of information regarding the state of the materials market. Today's session is an overview of the state of the materials market, as well as a conversation over coffee. So we hope you brought your coffee cups with you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy, and let's dive in. So I'll briefly go over some housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded and available in a follow-up email. There will be related resource links that will be entered into the chat, and they will be included in that follow-up email. There will also be a live transcript that will be generated by Zoom, so please be patient if you notice any grammatical errors that may occur. Feel free to use the chat feature to notify the EdReports team of any technical difficulties you may have, and then you can use the Q&A feature to submit questions throughout the webinar. If you're following us on Twitter, be sure to tag @EdReports and use #MaterialsMatter, as well as #CurriculumChat, and we'll be sure to follow you. So joining me for today's conversation are two presenters who are also members of the EdReports team. The first is Mark Lavinia, who is a data strategist at EdReports and the lead researcher for the organization's annual State of the Market report. He was a Strategic Data Project Fellow alumnus through the Center for Education Policy Research at Harvard University, and a special education teacher and literacy coach before earning a PhD in educational leadership and policy. Lauren Weiskirk is the Chief Strategy Officer at EdReports and a key contributor to the organization's annual State of the Market report. She has served in a variety of roles within public education and previously led instructional policy, professional learning, and organizational management teams at the New York City Department of Education. So thank you, Lauren and Mark, for being here. I look forward to our conversation today. For our agenda, we have 4 key items for today's session. You'll get to hear about EdReports, what we do, our expertise, our impact across the country. You'll also hear a background and context about the state of the materials market. You'll also hear the why behind this project and the significance of the State of the Market report. Myself, along with the presenters, will share each of the key findings with you and engage in a dialogue around the data for each of them. And then we will close with some next steps, as well as a call to action and things you can look forward to over the next 3 weeks. So I will start with sharing an overview of our mission at EdReports. We work to support educators by providing information and support about high quality instructional materials. And we do this in 2 primary ways. We work directly with educator reviewers who conduct reviews of instructional materials that we provide free of charge, with a goal of building awareness of the quality of aligned materials and what materials are on the market. We also work directly with states and districts to support their work in identifying quality materials for their local context. Our work has a direct influence on being able to make strong local decisions around instructional materials. And this really feeds into our theory of action. Our reviews allow us to identify what excellence looks like in materials. Those reviews, as well as our direct support of states and districts, enable local educators to demand excellent materials. And we've actually seen the market really respond to that demand by improving the materials they are publishing and releasing for educators to use. And that's something you'll hear more about during today's webinar as we dive into the state of the materials market. We really believe that reliable information against quality criteria in a quickly changing marketplace helps educators make informed purchasing decisions and ultimately improve student learning. Our goal isn't just about telling you what to do, but rather sharing the voices of educators just like you and empowering you to make great decisions for your classroom, your school, and your district. This graphic shows our impact across multiple states. So this is EdReports by the numbers. The educators who serve on the EdReports review teams have enabled us to have significant impact. To date, over 800 reviewers from 48 states have contributed to the publication of over 1,000 reports. 105 of the largest 200 districts across the country are using EdReports. And 29 state education agencies or departments used EdReports for their adoption plans or other work. And more than 30 publishers have made changes to their materials based upon EdReports reviews, and our work has impacted over 14 million students. So through our work, the reports published, our collaboration with educator reviewers, the districts and states we provide assistance to, our impact here at EdReports has been tremendous. So a little on why materials matter. Through our work, we know that instructional materials matter and that the instructional core is the foundation for the college and career-ready skills that students need. There's a lot of research to support the fact that materials are one of the most significant factors that impact student learning. We also know that high-quality materials are one of teachers' top priorities for where they'd like to see funding spent. Additionally, we know that materials are an important lever for equity and ensuring all students have access to rigorous grade level learning. And lastly, materials are truly a cost-effective measure because the effectiveness of high-quality materials compared to those that are not standards aligned generally cost the same amount. So this is a change that can be made without spending a lot of additional money. Here's a brief peek at our report center and the aligned indicators and evidence. EdReports at our core is about providing information to educators about the quality of materials. All of our reviews are conducted by educator reviewers across the country and are published for free on our website. And the goal of that is for folks to really be able to dig in and understand the characteristics of what makes quality materials, and then look against those characteristics for the programs they're considering or the programs they've already adopted. So you can see on the screen, our report center is where we navigate from. Within that, you can select the grade band and subject areas you are considering, and all of the different reviews we have completed will show up on that page. You can click next and see a summary, which is the middle image that you see there. And then you'll see a list of different programs and how they reflect the characteristics of quality. The far right side is the details of the report. Our educator reviewers provide such a tremendous amount of detail through the criterion and individual indicators about how these characteristics of quality show up in materials or where there might be gaps. And this is truly valuable because they both inform adoption decisions and can also inform understanding the materials that you may have. So we're going to move into the reason you are all here, which is to hear about the state of the instructional materials market. So let's start with some background and context. This is the 4th annual report that EdReports has produced since 2018, and one that continues to prove to be beneficial. So Lauren and Mark, our presenters for today, as I turn things over to you, please share with us the why behind this project. Why the State of the Market report, and why is this a priority?
Well, thanks, Pasha. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about our work here today. We started this work a few years ago because the curriculum market for just K-12 core materials is $8 billion annually, and there's remarkably little information about what is being purchased, let alone what's being used. And so when we started this work, we were lucky to partner with the RAND Corporation, have the data from our reviews, and put it all together to get a better better lens into what's actually happening. Because to your point earlier, when you were saying why materials are so important, we want to answer and help, educators across the country get a better handle on, okay, what's available? Are there aligned products coming into the market? Then what's being used? Because there's three parts, right? What's available, what's being selected and purchased, and then what's actually being used. Because ultimately, and we'll talk about this later as we get through some of the findings, it doesn't really matter what's selected if that's not making its way into classrooms, into teachers' hands, and into the students' education experience. Mark, is there anything you want to add on top of that?
Yeah, thank you. And happy to be here. I want to echo, that our partnership and friendship with folks at Rand Corporation has been a big help bringing our data and information we have collaborating with the information they gain. And what we've been able to do is bring together the information, as Pasha mentioned, this is our fourth annual report. Also, last year was the first year we were able to do a data snapshot and look specifically at the science market, which was really informative. Our plans for this year is we're going to continue to press into doing some subject area specific work and looking into doing a math, ELA, and science deep dive. So we've gotten a lot of great feedback on providing this information to the field, and it's been so informative to us operationally as well. So just really happy to do this work.
Awesome. That is great to hear. Thank you. Mark, I'm wondering if you could share with us, what was the approach you took to learn about and describe the state of the curriculum market?
Yeah, so first is bringing in the data that we collect and create from our reports in order to understand what's even available. And so pulling together reports that were published as of the beginning of the year in order to zero in on the 2021 market and also to see how that's changed over the years. We'll apply a filter to the data. There's materials out for 2022, but we filtered that off to zero in on past market years. And we'll bring that together with Rand Corporation AIR survey, also American Instructional Resources survey. And we'll use their micro level data, so response level data, and look at as far as applying the sampling weights so that we can make nationally representative inferences. And so pulling together our data with theirs and has been able to yield a lot of insights.
Thank you so much.
From there, I got it right here. So the approach we've taken is similar. There's been reports from Rand Corporation that also applies a similar approach because they've brought in our data into their reports as well. And so first, in terms of just understanding what's used, the way the survey is structured is teachers report on the specific titles that they use, but they're able to select multiple things because teachers use multiple things. But in order to get an estimate of percentage of teachers using something, we will bring in our data, knowing whether it's aligned, partially meets expectations or does not. And we'll filter the data to the highest rated. So if a teacher uses multiple titles and one of them is aligned, they will get coded as using an aligned program. And this way, it's a way of not double counting. And so that's our approach for identifying estimates of market on use. And then in this report, we also report in this talk, we're presenting on modification of materials, teachers' perceptions, support environment they have. In the actual report, we break out by some estimates by grade band. In today's talk, we're staying at the aggregate level. But we'll also do some group by in terms of how does it look different for whether they're using an aligned program or not based on certain perceptions they have. And unless we unless noted otherwise, everything we're talking about here is at the ELA math and science teacher, which we're happy to bring in, across all of those domains. So, yep.
All right, well, here's a look at our key findings. As you read all of them, I'm just going to briefly voice them over before I turn it back over to you, Mark. So the first, the availability of aligned instructional materials continues to increase. Second, despite the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on education, the use of aligned materials has remained consistent to previous years. Third, regardless of alignment, teachers are modifying their instructional materials at similar rates. And then also, teachers want materials that are aligned to state standards, that offer support for multilingual learners, as well as provide culturally relevant content and approaches. But few believe the materials meet their needs. And I can't wait till we dig into that. The last one, research shows that implementing high quality instructional materials in an environment that is supportive with ongoing professional learning and development leads to the most success. So as you can see, there are 5 findings, and we will start with the availability of use of aligned materials. So Mark, please talk to us more about findings 1 and 2 and the aligned data that supports it.
Thanks, Pasha. Yeah, so digging into the availability and use. So here are some bar charts that are based on our published reports. And the upper left box is ELA materials, bottom right is math. And what you see is how the market has changed over the years, filtering the data to the edition year for the material. So 2021 ELA, we see 51% meets expectations for standards alignment. But as you move back to earlier edition materials, 2019, 18, we see that there has been growth over that time, as well as as well as in math, we also see an increase. Interestingly, sort of a different story for ELA. The does not meet has kind of stayed pretty stable. So what there was initially was sort of high levels, equal levels of meets and partially meets, and the partially meets is given way to more programs that are standards aligned. Where in math, there was a high level of does not meet expectations initially, and that has dropped and been replaced by materials that meet. So there's a little interesting story between the differences between the two content areas, but interesting. Pleased to see an improvement across both. When we think about what's used, so here, if they've used at least one aligned curriculum, that's in the top row, okay? And so we have a group by ELA and math, and then change over the years. Interestingly, from 2019 to 20, and we reported on this in our last year's report, big improvements in use, roughly around 10% in both ELA and math. So the 2020 report, that was the timing of the survey is roughly early spring of 2020. And they were asked about their use of materials from 2019-20 school year. So a lot of those numbers in the 2020 year are reflecting pre-pandemic use. And then when we shift to looking at what happened last year, it was pretty flatline. So we didn't see the continued improvement in use of aligned materials, but we also didn't see it giving much ground either, which was reassuring. When we look at what actually did change a lot was use of the unrated materials, and we'll take a deeper dive into what's happening there. So that was where the increase, the big change that occurred from 20 to 21. Looking at what happened in materials that partially meet expectations, there was a decrease there, and also in not aligned. So there was this increase of unrated materials, but it is reassuring to see that the materials that met expectations didn't really give ground. That where those materials were being pulled away was actually in the materials that didn't meet expectations, which is maybe a net good story. Digging into what is the unrated materials, breaking out the unrated materials, it's largely supplemental programs. And we've heard this, anecdotally and also reported. In order for schools and teachers to adjust to, more remote learning, they were having to supplement their materials from a number of different sources. And so it's a reasonable conjecture that this increase in supplemental materials was a pandemic, a response to going remote and having to figure out how to adjust to school closures and so forth. Whereas there is some other portion of the market that we haven't reviewed, and that's sort of stable. It includes materials that schools and districts create. It also includes some old materials, and so looking at this overall, we have this picture of a big increase a couple of years ago in aligned materials. The last year, the big story is a lot of supplementing that occurred, but it didn't come at the cost of use of aligned materials. So on the whole, a good story, I think. Lauren, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so this right here is, this section, Mark, you just presented on. For me, this is the most important lens we have into the challenges and successes around getting more high quality instructional materials into classrooms. So availability, there's a pretty good story there. It is going up. It's going up, we think, for a couple of reasons. One, we have seen publishers really respond to what districts and educators are demanding in terms of quality. And as the market continues to improve, people are consistently doing better, which means there are options. Every single grade level, every single subject area, there are multiple options that districts can choose from for really high quality instructional materials. So it's not like, oh, I want something that's really great. We all have to pick the same thing. But rather, there's a real opportunity for local criteria to drive and really lead a selection process. So that's one. On the other end, around use, I agree, Mark, with what you said earlier. It's somewhat encouraging that in the first year of the pandemic, we didn't see huge dips in the use of aligned materials. And if you could go back could you go back a slide to the supplemental story? Supplements in and of themselves, they're not inherently good or bad, right? We know a lot of people use supplements, but this gets to part of your methodology point earlier, Mark, which is those who are reflected in this 30% for ELA and this 20% for math, they do not indicate that they use any core curriculum more than once a week, right? So what that leads to is a host of questions and about what do they have access? Are districts and schools providing that opportunity for teachers to work with high quality instructional materials? We're going to talk a little bit later about PD. Are they getting the PD to know how to use them, how to modify? But here also, does this indicate that people are supplementing and pulling a whole bunch of supplements to try to get to a core curriculum? And what happens in that case is we really got to take a harder look at coherence, because we hear from teachers across the country all the time how hard it is to ensure coherence within your year, coherence looking across other similar grade levels within your building, within your district, vertical coherence. And that's really, really hard to do if you're pulling together from multiple supplements. And in addition to that, you have to have a critical eye, right, when you're looking at the supplements. So what are they claiming to do How well does it fit? Are they standards aligned? There was a Fordham study a couple of years ago now that looked at, it's called like the Supplemental Curriculum Bazaar, and it looked at the quality of supplements in there. And while there was some disappointing news about if the materials, if the lessons and units were aligned to standards, even more striking was the lack of differentiation support and support for diverse learners that you would find throughout there. So those are things that, you know, when I see this number going up, those are the types of questions that it raises around what the experience is for teachers and what the experience is for students.
That's great points, Lauren. Thank you.
So I have a question, Lauren. I'm actually going to go back. Let's see. What's most important to know in the unrelated column? Could you voice that over some?
Excuse me. Yeah, in the unrated one.
Yes.
Yeah. So unrated, as Mark showed just a minute ago too, most of that is supplemental. So at EdReports, we've reviewed 90% of the products out there, over 90% in ELA and math. And so that unrated category isn't dominated by, oh, EdReports hasn't gotten to it yet. That is dominated by products that we wouldn't review because they're supplements. And at this time, we don't review supplements, or materials that were published before 2012. So that would be what's covered in that category.
Awesome. All right, I'll turn it over to you for modification.
So I alluded to this a second ago. Mark, I'm just going to keep going. I'm off mute. We're here. So I alluded to this a moment ago about modification. And this is another one of our key findings that for me raises more questions than it gives answers. And it's about how educators are using materials when they have them, right? So this is filtered to the group of educators that indicate they are using core materials, whether it's aligned, partially aligned, or not aligned, right? And we see fairly similar rates of modification. So what we're highlighting right here is roughly 30% of educators, regardless if they've aligned or unaligned materials, are still modifying half or more. This, to me, in one case with the aligned materials, makes me wonder about professional learning, makes me wonder about, are there other aspects to the curriculum beyond alignment that are leading educators to modify more? And look at that 16%. I'm particularly intrigued by the 16% and what we could do as a community to help, where we have teachers, 16% of teachers saying they have unaligned programs and make no modifications. It feels to me like we could have a really strategic push here to get higher quality materials into the hands of those teachers, because right now what they're indicating is that they are using unaligned programs basically as is.
Thank you. And just to elevate sort of our methodology here, it's worth pointing out that the survey respondents aren't telling us if they're using aligned material or not. That's once we've applied our data. So they're just saying, I use this program, and then we code it according to our data on alignment, and this is how it breaks out.
That's right, Mark. So do you know if what the product you have is high quality and aligned or not? And I think that's an important part of the PD, and like having a really strong adoption process, that would help you know the quality, the strengths, the gaps, the opportunities to improve for the products that you have. Such
a great point. That's right. So we dig into their priorities and perceptions. One of the things we asked, the survey asked them about was, what do they find important in terms of aspects of the curriculum? and along a scale of not important to extremely important. And then the survey also asked, and how adequate is your materials in these kinds of areas? A quick just overview on understanding reading this table. The 7 is completely adequate, and 1 is completely inadequate, with 4 being adequate in some ways and inadequate in others. So there's no description for 2 and 3, but they were asked to rate along a scale with these meanings attached to those points. And so when we look at, do they think it's important that their materials are aligned? We see, yes, high numbers, high percentages. Teachers find that very important. Looking at completely adequate and adjacent to completely adequate, not many teachers believe that their materials are doing that. Looking in other areas on support for EL, English learners, multilingual learners, similar story. A lot of teachers, more than half, 3/4 practically, think it's important to some extent, somewhat or extremely, but a quarter think that it's adequate in that area. And then in terms of being content and approaches that are culturally relevant, again, many find it important, but they don't feel that the materials are adequate in those areas.
Mark, I'm actually going to squeeze in a question that we have that came in from an attendee. How much of the supplemental materials is teacher created?
Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
No. So in our analysis on that table, and if I need to pull back to it, I can, but teacher created was actually a separate category. So if it's coded in our data as supplemental, then that's a different, that's a bona fide official published program. And teacher created was coded as another one. So if they said, I use a supplemental and teacher created, the individual would be coded into supplemental. That was given a higher ranking. Teacher created was given lower. So the only folks that would be at teacher created were those that either only use teacher created regularly or didn't report using any particular program at all. So the numbers we put in supplemental means they don't use a core program, and but they regularly, but they do use a supplemental, and that excludes the teacher created in the data we reported. Lauren, do you have anything to comment on this slide here?
Well, for me, this is the first time we've really dug into the perceptions to teacher perceptions in our state of the market report. And I think it's been invaluable for us as we've been having conversations with educators and district leaders and school leaders across the country, because it really, it speaks to a way that the market can move and the support for those moves that you would have with the people who are closest to the classroom and closest to the curriculum, which is the practicing educators, right? So don't shirk on standards. Standards are really, really important. More people want support for multilingual learners. And so this is an opportunity for product developers and publishers to do better and do more, both around multilingual learners and culturally relevant education. We actually, slight tangent, but in this past week, we released a different report, which was a landscape of the different tools that different educators, districts, research institutes are using to identify if materials support culturally relevant practices. What's telling about that landscape analysis, we looked across 15 different tools, is the proliferation of these and how many organizations are trying to look for this in materials. For me, that signals a great importance that is being placed on how well materials are meeting that need. there was a question in the chat too around like, how do we navigate with multiple states having new laws or policies that are prohibiting culturally relevant education practices and the like. And what's interesting about that, and what we've heard from districts and educators, is they are very firmly committed to having materials that help meet their students' needs, that they see the definition of quality as being standards alignment and doing more to engage students in the classroom. And one of the things we hear a lot of calls for action on is clarity on what actually is being prohibited or what is being looked at under these laws. And it's very hard to navigate in this environment. So I feel for the person who wrote the question in the chat saying like, how am I supposed to do it? But there's still a lot of uncertainty in those areas. We have some educator voices on this that I think would be really helpful if we could throw in the chat from some of our educators calling for and helping, I think, to illuminate why. So this chart is really helpful and interesting, but hearing the story straight from educators about why the importance and how materials that speak to different perspectives and backgrounds can elevate the learning for all students. So hopefully EdReports team, we could throw a couple of those in the chat at this time too.
Thank you for that. So looking at the environment in which teachers are working, the survey asked, well, what are you encouraged to do by your school leader? And the modal, that's not what I meant to do. Oh, okay. And the modal response was, whatever you think best meets your students' needs. And that feels right. Like, the teachers know the students best. That's followed by what's recommended or required in terms of the curriculum materials. And those were pretty close in terms of ranking. There is a thought, though, yes, teachers are the right people to make that call, but do they have the materials to deliver to the students that are standards aligned and meet the needs that they value? According to the teachers, not so much, as we saw on the prior slide. And then there's a question on, well, and once they have the materials, are they receiving the professional learning they need to know how to use these materials? And so that's what we dig in a little bit next. So in terms of how much support, what we see here is on the left, a table of hours of professional learning they receive, related specifically to how to implement their main instruction materials, not just PL in general. The right table is about how well they felt prepared from that training to use the curriculum that's provided by their school or district. And looking at these numbers, I don't know how much professional learning you need to receive. Like, that's an empirical question to do a good job with your materials, but certainly it's more than zero. And so, this, this 23% is a little eye-popping. And 1 to 5, that's like a half-day workshop. So I would venture to guess more than this is going to be called for or better. And then in terms of how well they felt prepared, 20%, not at all, right? Slightly for another 30%. So, I think these numbers beg, let's do a little more. We can do better for our teachers in terms of helping them in this area. The report also did go into high school, spotlight on high school teachers. Lauren, do you have anything you want to add on this?
Oh, yeah, just we've been talking about this overall for K-12, and then we look at high school, and it's even fewer hours of professional learning each year for that high school teachers are receiving on their curriculum and feeling less prepared for their professional development. So if you go back a slide, Mark, I was off mute and I giggled when you said, surely 23% or 0 hours is not enough. And I just want to underscore that like so much. When we look at some of the other findings about what's being used, about how often, how frequent, if you remember at the very beginning of this presentation, we're talking about how like once a week is the bar that's set. And nobody here believes that curriculum should be a script. Nobody here believes that that it is something that you shouldn't make yours and make sing and work in the classroom. So we all believe it should, that this is a really important resource for teachers to use to make sure that they're getting what they need for their students, what their students need. There's no way 0 hours of PL, 1 to 5 hours. Like we really need to value our educators as professionals, value their professional learning and growth, and make sure they have the tools they need. It is simply not enough. It is important, but not enough to get good stuff. So we need to get good curriculum. That is important, but that is not enough. We also need to make sure people have the time to get professional learning, to collaborate with each other, to experience common planning and be able to share successes, lessons learned. And based on this data, that is happening rarely or in pockets. And it's really important for us to think about that quality of experience happening for all of our educators.
Thank you for that, Lauren.
You know, I have a great question that came through that I want to definitely raise, and it's relevant to the professional learning. Is there additional data on the type of professional development received? So online webinar, in-person, hands-on, practice versus lecture. Can you share more there?
I'm going to be reluctant to speak off the top of my head on it. But yes, there are additional data on that, and in prior year surveys. For certainly, I'm going to say I'm not sure if it was asked in this year's survey, but I'm happy if there's follow-up questions. I'm happy to dig into some of that, but I don't feel like I can speak in numbers on that right now.
And I appreciate that question because that gives us more information about what we should look at and the types of information that would be interesting. Like if you're here at the State of the Market webinar with us, we are assuming you have a real interest in the curriculum market, in the experience of teachers and how we can make everything better for our teachers and our students. So, feel free to even throw into the chat more ideas for different analyses, what you'd like to see. We find this to be really valuable as an internal team too, as we do our planning and looking and research. So any suggestions and ideas for future topics are well received and welcome.
100%. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. For all of the attendees, we will do our best to address the questions as they're coming in. I know there's a team that is trying to answer those and get some of the related resources sent to you. But just to move us forward and to transition us out of today's conversation. So here are 3 things to think about in your instructional materials work. The first is investing in high quality aligned instructional materials, obviously creating an environment that supports the implementation and use of high quality materials, and then meaningfully involving teachers in the selection of new instructional materials. We at EdReports truly believe in elevating teacher voice as much as possible and ensuring they're included in that process. So we would love to stay connected with you in this work. Please check out the free resources on our adoption steps on our EdReports website. As Lauren said, share feedback with us about how these are supporting you and your priorities. I believe a team member is going to add a link to that directly into the chat now. And We'd also like to learn more about your work and explore opportunities of working together. So we support states and districts directly in these 4 ways, and we will customize our level of support to meet your needs. So you can reach out to any of the partnerships team members at the email address that you see just at the bottom of the screen. And we certainly would love to connect with you and grow further in partnership. Also, feel free to contact any of who you heard from today. You can email us directly just below our fabulous headshots. You will notice our emails are there. So you can certainly reach out to us directly. We truly look forward to continuing the conversation around instructional materials and staying connected. So we are continuing this amazing series. As I said, I wasn't just your facilitator today, but I will be with you throughout the rest of the series. And so next week's topic on July 28th, we will dive more into findings 1 and 2. You'll hear from 3 new presenters and we'll engage in another conversation, but this one specifically around standard aligned materials. And then on August 4th, we'll dive more into findings 3 and 4. We'll have a great conversation about what teachers want in high quality curriculum. And 3 additional presenters will join us for that conversation. And then lastly, we will close our series on August 11th, diving more into finding 5. We'll have a great conversation about the key factors for implementing high quality instructional materials with integrity. So we encourage you, please come back. If you have not registered already, links will go into the chat where you can do so. Share it with your networks, your peers. Bring your coffee and come in and dive into these great conversations with us. So with that, we just want to thank you so much for attending today's session on the state of the instructional materials market. You heard an overview as well as context behind the reports, and we thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you soon.